Good evening again. Lisa Martin, Austin Energy's Chief Operating Officer, here to present to you what I hope is the final update on the Resource Generation and Climate Protection Plan prior to your vote. Next slide, please. So you've seen this slide several times, and it's just a reminder for me to talk about how we together are building our bridge to our energy future, and what that looks like depends on all of our collective work and the work with the stakeholders. Today, my hope is to spend a lot of time having discussion with you, but I also want to summarize what we've done to date. And so that's the start of my presentation. So next slide, please. If I had to, that's a little bit hard to read. Let me read it to you. If I had to summarize the mission of the plan in a single sentence, I would say that we must meet Austin's rising energy needs while enabling an equitable, clean energy transition, and one that reflects our community's values of reliability, affordability, and environmental sustainability. Essentially, we need a plan that powers Austin Energy into the future and keeps true to the values and spirit that make Austin uniquely Austin. Next slide, please. So we've spent a lot of time talking about our current day challenges. You are very well aware of them. They're everything from what we've been hearing about from our community speakers today, increase to extreme weather and climate risk. We know that there's great growth in population and energy consumption, data centers, AI, electric vehicles, electric appliances, and the like. Also growth in population. We've talked a little bit about replacing our local power generation from recent plant retirements, and also a lot of changes in the ERCOT market, including some transmission congestion. We call that load zone price separation a lot. There's volatile pricing, and then financial risk, which really has to do with liquidity risk, or making sure we have enough cash on hand to settle up with ERCOT when extreme events occur. Next slide, please. If I had to summarize in a slide how we got here, there's a bit of a story to tell. And so walk with me from this timeline starting on the left-hand side. The last plan, the plan that we're currently under, was adopted in March of 2020, so just 4 years ago, and the world, from an energy perspective, was very, very different back then. So the plan was adopted, and one of the things that that plan did was it reaffirmed our commitment to retire the Decker steam units. They were old. It was time to retire them. They were kind of limping along, and so we retired the first one after the summer of 2020. That was 300 megawatts. And then that next summer, we had Winter Storm Uri hit. And that changed the ERCOT market in many ways, and certainly increased energy costs. We were scheduled to retire the second Decker steam unit after the summer of 21, but given the situation with Winter Storm Uri, we wanted to keep that generation around through the next winter. And so we did, and we retired Decker Steam Unit 2 in March of 22, right after the winter period. Together, that was 725 megawatts of local generation. That was there when we needed it, and that was about 50% of the local dispatchable generation within our service territory. Right around that time and around it, we started seeing increased congestion across the state in terms of transmission that did not allow all of the renewable power to come into our service territory. And we saw extreme congestion costs in 2022 totaling $135 million. And then it was even worse in 2023 at $150 million. I think we've all talked about the ERCOT market and how it works a lot, but this is the ERCOT market telling us that we have local reliability issues, that there's an increase of outage risks. This is when you're sitting on the edge between having power on or power off. And that transmission congestion is an increased cost that is passed through to our customers through the PSA rate. So they're paying a lot. And just for relative comparison, these numbers are about 3 times higher than the annual congestion costs that we saw prior to this time. And then in recent years, we've seen increased peak demand records that we don't expect to slow down. And so you can't point to any one change or situation that puts us in the current state that we're in. But when we say that we currently have reliability and affordability risk, this helps to paint a picture of that. And those risks put us at risk of reaching our clean energy goals as well. And so we need to figure out how we can do all of those things together as we move forward to 2035. All right, next slide, please. So it's our responsibility to adapt. We need to make sure that we have the ability to change with the changing energy landscape, and we really do want to expand upon the achievements of every generation climate protection plan that we've had to date. But our mission is to safely deliver clean, affordable, and reliable energy, and so the time to act is now, and we need to, that's what this plan is set to do. All right, so next slide, please. When we began with Ernest at earlier this year on our reset to the 2035 plan, we did a lot of work with the community and a number of community and industry expert stakeholders. And so you've seen this slide before. Just a quick summary of everyone that has been involved from the industry side. Next slide, please. And this slide represents all the organizations that have been represented in the community stakeholder work group. There's 40 different organizations here, and collectively they represent the diverse voices of thousands of Austinites. And we've met 5 times over the last 6 months. We spent a lot of time talking about the challenges we face and hearing their stories and how it impacts them, asking them about their values and their priorities. And they came together and collectively expressed their informed opinions. And the result of this work, next slide please, is kind of the foundation of the 2035 plan. So you've seen this before, but I want to just reiterate that these are the community value statements that we developed. We drafted these with phrases that we heard time and again from the community, and then we asked for their feedback, we incorporated it, and in the last community workshop, we shared these again, and we got general thumbs up. We didn't hear any following feedback.
Really quick question.
Yes, sir.
In the previous slide, I didn't see 2 important names, which are big energy users, Samsung and NXP, who've been very involved. Are they represented by CCARE or where?
Some of the large industrials, like the semiconductors, are represented by CCARE, yes. Okay. So, so the community helped us define these value statements, and then these objective statements on the next slide as well. So the objective statements provide more direction to the values, and they also model the priority order expressed by the community. And you'll notice that there's no separate objective statement for energy equity, and that is because there is an incorporation of energy equity into each one of these plan objectives, and that's highlighted in the blue bold text. All right, next slide, please. So then we spent time doing a modeling track. And you know that well because you spent hours and hours sitting with us here in office hours, reviewing the data and whatnot. So, so many models, so much data, so many hours. But the whole point of it was to understand trade-offs and our resource plan needs. And I just want to stop and say thank you for all the time and effort that you put into it. I know it was a lot. But our goal was to understand trade-offs and what we need to put into our resource plan. And so last meeting, next slide please, we pivoted. We said we're not picking a portfolio, just a reminder. I still get people asking me, which portfolio are you picking? So we're not picking a portfolio. There are just too many uncertainties in modeling and too many unknowns in the future that we use portfolios and modeling to give us information about what needs to go in the resource plan. And so we pivoted last meeting, and we asked you to respond to 2 questions in a survey. One was, what key insights did you receive from the modeling, and what characteristics do you want to see in the plan? And so that's what we're going to look at now, is the results of the survey. Next slide, please. Of all of your responses to the key insights question, there were 4 main themes, and we're going to go into each one of these individually. Next slide, please. So first, y'all said investment is needed. You said nearly all the portfolios show real problems begin in a few years, pointing to the need to make some investments. And that affordability is very important given the nature of the statewide grid. Some of you kind of lamented, I assume. It's going to be expensive, and nearly all portfolios show costs being above the 2% affordability goal. And the way that I read some of these is that action is needed, it will cost money, It'll also cost money if we don't do things. So I put them all under the category of investment is needed. There was also broad consensus or lots of feedback about increasing transmission capacity. The additional 250 of megawatts that we modeled in the refined portfolios reduces the reliability risks. We can't control everything, such as extreme weather, but we can make our risks lower with important investments in local generation, but especially in transmission. Somewhere around 250 megawatts is the amount needed to reduce risk on the system and keep price separation away. And then local transmission upgrades are key for improved reliability, affordability, and sustainability for Austin.
So why don't we pause for a minute and ask for questions online or anyone in here. We have a new member. We have some other members that really weren't participating in as much in these discussions. So are there any questions or comments or discussion you want to have on this so far? Okay, thanks.
All right. Okay, thank you. Next slide, please. The next two categories were do not prematurely retire existing generation. So we should not plan to retire our existing gas units at this time. Keeping the gas units at some level over the next 10 years is important, though it's possible to run them less. And then someone looked at the portfolio specifically and concluded it seems that keeping Decker and Sand Hill available through 2035 has a similar reduction on reliability risk. And then this last category is a little bit of a catch-all, so I didn't go into 3 more slides. But collectively, these talk about peakers, batteries, and carbon-free insights. So if we need some peak capacity that is seldom used, then we should see if the benefits of that outweigh the costs, and maybe those carbon emissions can be offset in some way. Someone else said, I'm not in favor of a new combined cycle plants, but I'm okay with as many natural gas peaker units as needed as part of a balanced generation mix. Someone related to batteries said, I think we're underestimating the local battery storage capability. We need to coordinate with transmission planning as a solution to congestion and load zone pricing. I think batteries are important, should be in the mix, but battery heavy isn't going to be viable financially. And then it looks like a carbon-free future will be possible once some key technologies, most notably long-duration storage, mature a bit more. Did you want to do the same on this slide?
Let's pause for a minute. Any discussion on this? Okay.
All right. So the next slide shows the 4 categories, how we summarized yours, and then we had shared our key insights with you as we developed the portfolios, the refined portfolios, and they lined up pretty well. So in terms of the investment is needed, we observed that we have immediate challenges we need to solve, and the model results are very sensitive to high load growth scenarios. Transmission capacity and existing generation, we took the same takeaways from the modeling as you did. When it comes to peakers, batteries, and carbon-free, we looked at 2 of the portfolios that tried to work through reliability and liquidity risk, and we noted that the high levels of new energy efficiency, demand response, local solar and storage, plus existing generation manage reliability and liquidity risk, but at a higher cost, and pace of adoption exceeds the estimated feasibility. So this was a takeaway that...
Can I ask a question? Well,
sure.
I'll let you finish.
I was just going to say, this is a takeaway that pointed towards some of the portfolios that the EUC asked us for, where the amount of energy efficiency, demand response, solar and storage were higher than what DNV said was the max potential.
That is basically what I was going to ask you. So basically what that's saying is the portfolios that we asked you to model, like 15, 16, and 17. That's
right.
The feeling of Austin Energy internally was those numbers, while they solve the problem, you're not convinced. The consultant you hired is not convinced that we can reach those numbers. Therefore, it calls into question those portfolios.
That's right. That's right. Yes. Yes. To get to the levels of reliability that we need, which doesn't mean it entirely is gone, right? But just to bring it more in balance, we were noting a number of our portfolios, as we were kind of refining them, we were trying to see, can we solve some of the reliability risks? It's why we added the transmission capacity. It's why we tried to keep the existing generation in there, because you would see the reliability risk numbers shoot up. And so then we're like, well, what does it take? What other things can you put? Now I'm going to jump ahead for a moment, but tools in the toolbox to try to get the reliability risk down to what is less scary levels than current day. And so we saw those risks go down, but it was at levels that we think are beyond what the consultants have suggested we think are feasible. And so we should question whether or not we want to bet on that type of adoption and rely on just those tools in our toolbox.
And my reading of we asked a bunch of questions to the consultant, they came back with answers. Mm-hmm. And the way I'm paraphrasing it is, the consultant didn't say the levels that you modeled aren't possible. What they said is, under current circumstances, it's not possible, or you would have to invest quite a bit more money to get there.
I thought there were two numbers. There was the economic optimal, and then the technically feasible or technically possible. And I thought the economically optimal was achievable. Maybe you could give us some more specificity on those two. I mean, it's obvious that the technically achievable is at best a stretch goal. I mean, means you got to spend a lot of money on that, and it's beyond the economics. But that set of numbers from DNV on the economically optimal, can you describe more fully what those numbers were and how achievable? Because when I hear the discussion about achievability versus maybe not achievable,
yes.
How does that play into the economically optimal?
David, can you jump ahead to slide 44? It's in the appendix. I promise I don't have that many slides. And so what we're talking about here for everybody is that this is the amount of megawatts of different resources that we modeled in some of the portfolios. The four colored bars are portfolios 14, 15, 16, and 17. 15, 16, and 17 were ones that were defined by the Electric Utility Commission. And you can see that the max economic market potential from the DNV study is shown by the black dotted line. And so what we did in our portfolios was we maxed out. We said that's as much as we hired a third party to tell us what can we do, what do we think we can kind of count on as we move forward over the next 10 years. Our ultimate idea and objective was to figure out, is that enough, or do we need more? Do we need to build more? And so we'll talk more about that as we look at our proposal. But what we're saying here is that we put in the max amount, and then the portfolios 15, 16, and 17 from the EUC had higher quantities. And then, Cyrus, you're right. You asked DNV specifically about, what do you think about these numbers, right? And I think you might have, you said you were looking at a portfolio that had 540 megawatts of EE, 300 megawatts of DR, and 700 solar. So you were looking at portfolio 17 when you asked that question. And their response was, in general, market potential is seen as an estimate of what could be achieved. And I think you have these, by the way, not necessarily with you today, but Amy sent them out. Market potential is seen as an estimate of what could be achieved under ideal conditions, subject to our assumptions around incentives and program costs, while conforming to industry best practices. In order to achieve higher levels of potential, additional funds and resources would need to be committed, as well as substantial effort expended to break down barriers to adoption and participation. Specifically for energy efficiency, increasing to the yellow amount would be challenging under the time horizon, required increased program spending, program staff, and implementation staff. It would also have to assume the availability of the equipment and workforce to facilitate installations, which is a barrier industry-wide. For local solar, the increase that you have, which is on the far right side, would be extremely challenging. Here, the biggest barrier is cost of the systems and would require significant investment and incentives in order to make the decision to purchase equipment cost effective for consumers. In addition, supply chain concerns and interconnection barriers would limit the amount of solar that could be realistically installed. And then for demand response, which wasn't much higher, but the response was it would be most challenging in terms of participation. The participation rates that were used in the analysis are at the upper end of what is currently considered achievable within the industry. Significant increases in incentives that could render the programs not cost-effective may be required to push past those upper limits.
So to quote Dumb and Dumber, there's still a chance?
I think our insight is that we just wanted to say that you could get there if you exceed the estimated feasibility, and then I think there's a question of whether or not you want to rely on making a bet that that would happen.
And the cost would be higher.
And the cost would certainly be higher.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks. So I will say I have some frustration that we've been hearing about this study for a year now. And I know the results haven't been out that long, but they have been out for months, and yet we haven't actually seen the study. I had previously asked a couple different times whether or not the standard offer was included and had been told no. We then asked again just to be crystal clear, and we got the answer that yes, it was. Had I known that, I would have had a whole nother series of questions like what price was assumed and, other things about the program. We know very little about the assumptions behind these numbers. And I'm not saying that they're wrong, but it really would have been nice to have the actual report for us to look at instead of just these black lines.
So I appreciate your frustration, but I would like to respond because when we talked about these assumptions up front, there was time during office hours, and I understand that y'all asked several questions about them. When you asked for time to delve deeper into it, you gave us a very lengthy list of questions that we got responses to and posted and shared with everybody. The reason that the report's not available is simply because the scope of work is not complete yet. So this was just a portion of the work that DNV Energy Insights has been hired to do, which would help us feed reasonable numbers into our modeling. But there's additional work that they're doing related to what we're proposing in terms of transitioning from megawatt reduction to greenhouse gas avoidance, and that work is still underway. So not yet complete, so I don't have it to give to you.
I guess I wish that you would give us what you have, even if it's not completed. You're saying that our portfolios are just null and void because of this study that we don't get to see. So I get it, we're not going to see it, but.
David, if you go back to slide 16. Sorry, did you have something else, Cyrus?
Well, I would say not null and void, but I would say there's a number that DNV has provided, and if City Council wanted to go pursue numbers beyond that, it would be with the expectation that you would probably have to, it would cost more, right?
Well, that's what I don't know.
Yeah.
Like, did they assume that they were going to pay 7-point-something cents for the standard offer, or did they assume the 11 point whatever that got approved?
I would agree with the point. This is just an insight and an observation that the numbers that got to the reliability exceeded the estimated feasibility. The last bullet on the slide is talking about managing reliability and liquidity risk with portfolio 14. That objective of that portfolio was to say what's the minimum amount of additional storage and natural gas peakers you could use to fill the rest of the gap. And so portfolio 14 also managed reliability and liquidity risk while maintaining low overall use of the peakers. We were trying to test and see could we really keep their capacity factor low, and they did run less than 12% of the time.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Yeah, the previous slide that was for scenarios 14, 15, 16, 17, or I might have the numbers wrong. Is that on a different slide deck? Because I don't think it's on the backup that we had. I just was curious if I have the right slide deck, I guess.
It's in the appendix of the...
Oh, in the appendix, okay.
Yep.
That one gets me every time. I'm sorry. The appendices.
The appendix is long on this one, yes. The appendix, to be clear, because I don't want to forget to tell you this later, the appendix includes some information that's specific to what we're presenting today, but it also presents the updated, the full set of results for 14, 15, 16, and 17 that we gave you last time, but weren't able to fully present because of a glitch in the modeling. And so we gave it to all the commissioners. We wanted to make sure it was public, so we appended it to the back of this one as well. So for all the
Sounds good.
public
Thank you very
viewers.
much.
Thank you. All right. So I want to move again from the weeds of modeling into how we get to the characteristics of the plan and dialogue about what you want to see in the plan. These, again, are just observations. So next slide, please. So again, the basis of the plan are the values and the objectives that were formed with the community, and then it's the toolkit that, like, what else are we doing with that? The toolkit is what I'm about to present to you. Those are like actions and details that help provide the flexibility to manage the trade-offs and the changing conditions. So you could ask your question about, like, what kind of tools are we putting in the toolkit? And we use this framework with the thought that we're looking to see how we're going to get the right tools to balance trade-offs, and then also to try to make sure that we can remain outcome-based. All right, next slide, please. I'm definitely not going to read you this slide because this is even just a summary of it. If you want to go in the appendix and see all of the feedback that y'all provided in response to the survey question about what are the most important characteristics to reflect in the 2035 plan. And so thank you for your response. In summary, you talked about saying you need flexible, multifaceted portfolios, and you talked about that in the form of adaptability, resource investments, and battery storage. There was a highlight on demand management and energy efficiency. You talked about customer energy solutions and flexible targets. With regards to carbon reduction and renewables, you asked for clean energy commitment, carbon-free by 2035, and emissions controls. And then you also talked about reliability and affordability in the form of opportunity costs, affordability goals, mitigating congestion, and having reliability assurance. And then some of your comments spoke to infrastructure and policy leadership in the form of transmission, building and energy codes, and emerging technologies. So we're taking all of this into consideration as we build the draft plan. The text in black is just a sampling of the quotes or the responses you gave to us. Again, the appendix has the full detailed list of your responses. Okay, so we take this, and we take all the feedback from the community and everywhere we've gone so far, and we start to talk about what's actually in the plan. Next slide, please. There are 4 major categories.
And just to be clear, you're giving us the plan tonight, or you're giving us the plan next meeting?
So I'm gonna give you the official proposed draft plan will be posted next week, and for a vote, a recommendation by y'all on December 2nd. What I'm doing tonight is I'm highlighting how far we have, like this is the basis of the plan, so that I can get your feedback, so that you can say, I like this, I don't like this, I want to see this in there, make sure this is in that piece of it, etc. It's kind of getting from the modeling to the plan. Wanted to make sure we didn't rush you. Okay, so 4 major categories of tools we put in the toolkit, again, that's the framework, that are necessary to address our current day challenges. The order is really important, and I want to highlight that. The first thing is we prioritize customer energy solutions, and then we layer in local solutions to help meet our local needs fully. We also want to keep our clean energy goals. Achieving decarbonization has to be there as well. And then in order to make sure we can reach our goals, we need to foster a culture of innovation, so we're positioned to adopt emerging technology when it becomes available, so we can continue to reach our goals in the most reliable and cost-effective way. So next slide provides
I feel like
details.
I'm asking too many questions.
You're
and I
doing great,
apologize.
Cyrus.
Is it okay? Or
Absolutely. Sure.
And I know other commissioners might have questions. So question number 1, maintain Black Start utility status. I know you've told us this before, but can you tell us right now which units presently can provide Black Start?
Yes.
Are Black Start capable as defined by ERCOT?
Yes. Our Decker peakers have Black Start capability. 2 of them are under contract with ERCOT. 1 is a primary and 1 is a backup, so that we have a unit available should the worst case scenario happen.
Okay, and can the Sand Hill peakers also be Black Start?
Currently, they are not. They are next start units. You start a Black Start unit.
Okay.
And then you use it to energize a Next Start unit.
Okay, and I know there have been discussions within ERCOT about sometime in the future that batteries could also, inverter-based resources could also provide Black Start. Am I correct that that currently is not allowed in ERCOT, but there are discussions about it perhaps in the future?
That is my understanding. Yes, it is not currently allowed in ERCOT.
Okay, and then I just wanted to thank you guys for the work on the geothermal. That was exciting to see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, really excited about the geothermal. Okay.
I had a follow-up question.
Go ahead.
Is that
Go
okay?
ahead. I'll go.
Just on the Sandhill peakers, is there like a retrofit or something that could be done to make it so those could be used for Black Start? And if
Yes.
so, can you describe that or tell
Well,
us?
there is some investment that could be done to make them Black Start capable, yes. And the specifics I'd have to get back to you on. Actually, I might have it with me. Hold on a second. Oh, it just says require upgrades and modifications. So,
Okay, thanks. Well, I think that's a hot topic that keeps coming up, so I would love to know more about like approximate costs, how long that would take, just to understand that, if that's possible.
okay. I don't think we have gone to that level of analysis yet. Given the point of this is really just, and what they're talking about here is the maintain Black Start utility status. This is really just at the policy level to make sure that we have units that are able to support the grid if the worst case scenario happens and we have a blackout emergency in Texas. We want to make sure that if we don't have Black Start capable units, then we have to wait for power to be brought to us. And so we really want to be part of the solution, especially as the capital city. So your questions are very valid and important. We want to make sure we keep that as a capability.
And we want to make money.
No,
I mean, right? It's a contract, you get paid for it, right? From
We have to pay for it as a load, and we can offset that cost as a general.
Okay.
Get the net zero.
so.
So, Lisa, maybe you could describe for people who don't understand necessarily what Black Start is. You touched on it a little bit, but kind of bring to bear the scenario of if we had a blackout
Yeah,
and we didn't have sufficient Black Start resources, then the capital city is black. It's dead
dead.
until somebody else boots up. It's like rebooting a computer, and then you can import. And then how many days might that take? Because you may have participated in the ERCOT Black Start exercises that
I
they
have
had.
participated in the ERCOT Black Start simulations. They are scary. It is a very long and tedious process, and it would be weeks to bring
Weeks?
to bring the grid back. It would certainly be weeks if not longer. We've fortunately never had a blackout in ERCOT, but we do. ERCOT and all the transmission and generator owners across the state work together to coordinate a plan. It starts with having units that can start up without support from the electric grid, because there is no electric grid at this point in time. So they start up on their own, and then they start to build islands, and they essentially start to build the backbone of the ERCOT grid, the transmission grid. Then once you get the backbone stable, you have to make sure all the variables of the grid stay very in line so you don't have collapse because voltage gets out of whack or frequency gets out of whack. And then you're balancing supply and demand, like generation and load, bit by bit by bit. And it's a very carefully coordinated process. And then once you get the stable backbone, the transmission backbone, then you can start to bring power back to all the customers. We imagine, it's been estimated that it would take weeks. It's a lot worse if you're sitting there and you don't have Black Start units and you're just waiting for someone else who has a Black Start unit to start up and to try to build those towards you.
6 weeks, Bob?
Bob's guess is 6 weeks, yeah. Okay.
So if we had that circumstance, the questions probably would be, why didn't we have enough Black Start inside the fence to boot us up, right?
This is one of the reasons that this is on this plan. The existing plan has us shut down all of our existing generation, and so my team says, so what are we going to do without black start units? So that's one of the reasons why that's in there.
Please.
I'm just curious, if in that process, Austin, is a biggish city, like, how long would it take even with black start units just for, Austin Energy? Like, would Austin Energy service territory come back on in a matter of days? Or I'm just curious, like, how long it would take just to rebuild the local.
Yeah, I don't know that I have that answer, because the way that it's done is, again, you build the backbone first. So it's not everyone for themselves, right? This is a matter of being part of the process where people are saying, what are you doing? And our answer is either, well, we're waiting for someone to bring us power, or we're actively starting up our black start generator, we're building the synchronization corridors, and et cetera, so.
Thanks. I get that. I think that's important, though, for people to understand that this isn't like we get to island and, have power. Like, I probably won't have power even if y'all are doing your let's hope we don't get to this point.
Let's hope we never get there. It would
But
be a terrible situation.
I do think it's confusing enough that some might think that this is like, oh, we're good if we have this, we won't black out. But it sounds like,
I think
no,
we're better.
We're better.
Better.
Yeah.
Right.
And I also, we definitely don't want this to happen, but during Winter Storm Uri, we were 4 minutes and 30-something seconds away, right? Which was just hold your breath. Thankfully, that did not happen. The ERCOT grid operators were able to swoop in and save that. Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about black start. I had planned to talk about that later. If I start going into that, you remind me otherwise. Let me start at the top, because before you get to generators, you have to start with prioritizing customer energy solutions. It's critical and important to start there, because for all the reasons that you spoke about earlier when we were talking about the numbers that you want to put into the portfolios, right? Energy efficiency, demand response, the best way to serve a customer is to not have to provide them power in the first place, right? We want to do everything we can to keep our bills low, to keep our customers comfortable. We want to give them the solutions that they want. That includes the rooftop solar and the customer-owned batteries. We want to max out what DNV says we can do, and then we want to say, is that enough? And the answer is no. You have to also have local solutions. So we're talking about things like, and that's why it says maximize demand-side management first. So that adds in taking into account addition transmission import capacity. We spent a lot of time dialoguing about that before. We know it's not the silver bullet answer. And then we also need utility scale batteries. We need more efficient peaker units that would be used only when needed. And then, again, we have spent a lot of time talking about black start utility status. All of these things collectively help us solve our near-term today risk, but we still want to make sure that we reaffirm our commitment to carbon-free and decarbonization. So the carbon-free by 2035 goal remains fundamental to our plan, and as does exiting coal and reaffirming REACH until we can find that exit from the Fayette power plant. This includes remote wind and solar and other technologies, some of those which still remain in a culture of innovation, because these are all the things that we need to do to stay on the leading edge so that when the emerging or evolving technologies become the game changers that can allow us to get rid of anything that produces fossil fuel and help us reach our carbon-free by 2035, we need to be ready and poised to adopt that. So I know that you mentioned the geothermal project, and I just wanted to highlight that again. That pilot geothermal generation is what you just saw in the news release.
And so the cognitive dissonance, the problem I'm having is carbon-free by 2035 and the need for more efficient peaker units. How can we build additional peaker units and still meet our carbon-free by 2035 goal? That's where I see a disconnect there.
Yeah, I mean, I hear you. Right now, the technology that's available to us to meet our near-term risks is to include more efficient peaker units. The idea here is they would be used only when needed, and they're more efficient than our existing generation. So on a good day, you've got cleaner generation coming out of it. That helps us get closer and closer to our carbon-free goal. And then either the technology has evolved so that we no longer need these peaker units in 2035 and we don't use them anymore. Or we essentially are doing something where we're saying we've done everything we can and the only way to get to carbon-free is to clean up the rest, do the best and clean up the rest. And so that would be things like carbon capture.
Or maybe green hydrogen actually exists in 2035.
Maybe it does. Yeah.
And then, sorry, I had another question, I forgot it. Oh, exit coal and reaffirm reach. Is that reaffirm reach only on Fayette, or is that also thinking about using reach on the gas units?
So, yeah, I don't want to get bogged down in the weeds, but I'm going to take a moment to explain what I mean by that. So that specifically is related to the reach that we apply to Fayette. That doesn't mean that I don't think we need to have guardrails and using these units only when needed. So what we're talking about when we say more efficient peaker units used only when needed, the idea is that they're peaker units, right? They're not getting dispatched on a regular basis. Fundamentally, the ERCOT market isn't going to dispatch them, right? Whereas the coal unit, it's more base load, like, you know, so it wants to run that more often, right? The benefit of reach on coal is that it displaces the coal and instead you use, there's cleaner natural gas that's coming from the ERCOT market, right? In this case, if you were to apply reach, it's not quite the same thing because you're already only using them when needed. So what we think we would be doing here instead is monitoring the capacity factor. We said when we modeled it, it was about 12% of the time for our peaker units. And then if our peaker units started to run more than that, we could put run hour limitations on them. It's essentially the same thing. I just want to say that what we're doing is we're talking about limiting the emissions.
Or it's an emission limit.
Mm-hmm. You could do that too. Yeah.
Sure.
I have a lot of questions and concerns around the reach or and how that's going to work, but I guess I'm going to start with the carbon capture piece of this. It wasn't modeled at all because y'all put it in the not technologically ready category. So we don't know anything about how that changes the cost of that path versus, you know, the cost of doing more of the local solar and batteries. Have you all done any research? I mean, I also have fundamental questions about, I don't really hear anything about carbon capture being used on peaker plants. It's usually on more like baseload, you know, plants that's even a conversation about. And even then, oftentimes a lot of complications and difficulties. So yeah, I'm just wondering, like, what research have you all done? Is this just a kind of like carbon capture is a thing that's out there, or is there something behind it to make us think that it could actually be implemented on the units you're wanting to build?
So carbon capture is intended in this case, again, it's in the culture of innovation because there's a lot to be still figured out about that technology. And it's intended to be a broader category that would capture both carbon capture and sequestration, direct air capture, and any other types of technologies that form in that school of thought over the time between now and when you need to meet our commitment of carbon-free by 2035. So I think there's a lot of things that could change between now and then. And so, no, we didn't model it now, but the good news is we're not picking a particular portfolio. What we're looking to do is to build a portfolio that meets all of our needs and has the flexibility to adapt to a changing environment, and then to put restrictions, like emissions controls and whatnot, so that we continue to be have a cleaner outcome than we have today, while technology can catch up in various ways.
I guess that does not sound like a plan, and I guess you're saying it's not a plan, but you have up on achieve decarbonization right at the top, carbon free by 2035. Like, what if you can't do carbon capture or decide it's too expensive, are you going to stop running those units in 2035 after less than 10 years after you invested in them?
Well, let me tell you a little bit more about the peaker units and the other opportunities of what other things we're trying to put into the toolbox as we start to have that conversation, because in reality, right, it's one of the most aggressive goals across the elite utilities in the United States. And so some of them are not even willing to go that far. A lot of them have carbon neutral or by 2040 or 2050. And so, and some have carbon free, but by further dates out. So this shows our commitment to finding a path, and we'll do the very best we can within the bounds of what we can do. We need to make sure we still provide power reliably, we need to do it affordably, and we need to get as close as we can, and we're hoping that technology will allow us to get there. So I don't know what else to tell you, but that's the best I can do when I'm standing here today in 2025, looking at a goal that's 10 years out. Okay.
So we're talking about, potential efficient peaker utilization, be it a megawatt hour or an emissions limit. I mean, is it possible to also, like a lot of the issue is like the congestion and types of things. Is it possible to just use them to collapse that, such that we're not experiencing higher prices here versus elsewhere? Like as a methodology for using them?
Yeah, I think that's also something that we could consider, is making sure that they serve the purpose of reducing the congestion prices. That's fundamentally when they would be run anyway.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
That all aligns with when we're at the highest demand, when you need them most. So.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. I promise we can come back to this slide.
Can I just say, I feel like there's one bullet point which is missing, which
Oh,
would
please.
be, I don't see the words long duration storage. I think a number of us think that's a technology that at some point will be important,
Okay.
and I don't see it there. I don't know
Under.
where it would be achieved, either foster culture of innovation or achieve decarbonization.
Okay.
That seems like a technology we should be, I mean, you have utility scale batteries, but I'm just saying specifically
Yep.
long duration storage.
And to be clear, just as a philosophy, I'm not looking to exclude any sort of technology. I mean, I think it's noteworthy and it deserves a note. And so I'm glad you pointed it out. I didn't even think about that. But it wouldn't be a situation where it's like, oh, it wasn't listed under culture of innovation, therefore Austin Energy is not paying attention to it. So I appreciate that it's noteworthy, and we'll add that in. Let me kind of say that one thing that's become clear throughout all of our conversations and our modeling is that we need to have flexibility. And so, again, once you max out customer energy solutions that you think you can reasonably count on, I hope we have more than that too. I absolutely do. We know that, but once you max that out, then you include transmission import capacity. There's really two technologies that are ready today to fill the gap, and that's utility scale batteries and those peaker units that we've been talking about, and I want to talk about those in a little bit of detail. People have asked us to talk about them a little bit more. So next slide, please. So this is a picture of kind of what the tools look like. We're going to start with, I put them on side by side because, as you can see from the toolkit, we're proposing that we need both of them. So on the left, you have battery storage. These resources can store and discharge energy for a certain period of time, typically 2 to 4 hours. This image is a 150 megawatt power plant in Australia. It's an example of a utility scale system. We don't have these here locally yet, but this is the type of thing that we could build. We do have substation size installations. So each one of these units individually is about the size of a tractor trailer. You can put those in your substations. I've had the opportunity to do that for Austin Energy as part of the Shines project. And so I have a lot of experience with battery storage. They're very flexible technology. There are some challenges associated with them, but I'm really a fan of them in general, and hope that we can all agree that that's the right path forward for our portfolio. I mean, for our toolkit. On the right-hand side, you have natural gas peakers. This is our Decker site. And so when we talk about a peaker unit, those are the ones that are circled in the in the white circle. For comparison of size, sometimes people talk about you're building a natural gas plant. So a natural gas plant is like the Decker steam units that you see to the right. And those are the ones that we retired at the beginning of the timeline I talked about earlier. And so to be clear, we aren't looking at 1,000 megawatt natural gas plant, like a combined cycle plant or a steamer unit like you see here. We're talking about peaker units. They're smaller, they're more modular. We heard all the stakeholders pretty loud and clear. There was a lot of public comment against the combined cycle plant, and so we pivoted away from what we believed at the time was the most reliable path forward, and pivoted away to what we think is can still fill the need. Really, these units would just run to fill the gaps of the longer duration events. Okay, so next slide, please. There are trade-offs associated with these. And next slide, David. All right, for batteries, batteries are highly dispatchable. You can turn them on and off very quickly. They can be cleaner depending on how you charge them. They are duration limited. You do have to consider upstream things like mineral mining practices, and with the there are regulatory risks, especially as we expect under the new administration with regards to tariffs and incentives. I hope they don't impact them too much, but I'm not really sure what's going to happen there. Peakers are also highly dispatchable. We talked a lot about black start capability. The newer units would produce less emissions than our current units. There are some cons. You have to think about upstream methane leakage, and they do create emissions, including carbon. When you look at having both batteries and peakers in your portfolio, in your toolkit, batteries would be used first to minimize the emissions. They would support the short duration needs, and you'd use those every time you have a short duration need. But the peakers step in when your duration exceeds what the batteries are capable of. The diversity of the tools improves the response, and you'll be less vulnerable to any of the disadvantages listed up above. Next slide, please. So we also did some modeling to compare peakers and batteries. And if you just look at the picture on the far left and the far right, everything else in these portfolios is the same. This has maximum energy efficiency, demand response, local solar and customer-side batteries from the DNV study. There's 1,800 megawatts of wind and solar PPAs. Gets to your 65% renewable energy goal. This includes 250 megawatt import capacity, and it doesn't retire the existing generation. So everything else is kept constant. When you're looking at the orange bar or the red bar, the batteries option, the cost is $400 million higher than the peaker option. So not too much. The emissions for batteries is 0.9 million metric tons less, so there is a trade-off there. But the difference really comes in the reliability risk. And so when you're just doing batteries, this is essentially the equivalent of the portfolios that y'all modeled. It just reduces the amount of the volumes of the technologies down to those maximum DNV levels. So you still have some reliability risk here. And when you end up combining the batteries with the peakers and do the hybrid solution, you start to see more balanced trade-offs. You see more middle ground results. The next slide tells a little bit more about that reliability risk. And so here in 2027, we installed the first amount of either batteries or peakers. If you look at the red line, that's the peakers solution. You can see that 200 megawatts of peakers brings that near-term reliability risk down pretty far. The batteries, it brings it down a little bit, but not as much. You'll see the batteries, the risk actually goes up because it can't fight against the load growth, and only the transmission import capacity brings that reliability risk down in the batteries only portfolio. The hybrid, however, gives a little bit on reliability, but again, provides more middle ground results, but still a substantial difference in terms of mitigating the near-term risk.
Is there somewhere in the appendix this same slide if you don't make any investments? I just can't remember, like, if we don't do anything by 2027, what is the risk in terms of reliability risk hours?
There is a no new commitment portfolio that was modeled. I think it was portfolio 2,
So it's somewhere in those Excel
and I think it's in the
spreadsheets.
Excel spreadsheets.
Okay.
It would not have the import capacity, but if you're just looking at what is it in 27 or 26,
Yeah, just
25?
trying to get a sense of.
Yeah,
how
I think
much
it's in the
those
Excel files.
investments really help.
Yeah.
Okay, I can look at it later.
Okay. So the path forward, after our discussion tonight, we're going to have a similar discussion with the council at the UOC tomorrow morning. We'll incorporate the feedback that you have on top of what we've shown you here as the proposed plan and post the plan next week for your review. That's getting posted with the council agenda for December 12th. And then you'll return on December 2nd and vote on that plan with your recommendation, and then council will consider it at the December 12th council meeting. Okay, that was a lot. I have one last slide. At the end of all of this, I want us all to be so proud of this plan, right? I want us to be able to say that our plan is powering our future, that we're flexible and ready to adapt to the changing risks. I want you to say we have the cleanest energy portfolio in Texas, cleanest in, one of the cleanest in the country, that we have industry-leading customer energy solutions, that we're promoting reliability, affordability, and sustainability, protecting our most vulnerable, resilient to extreme weather, that the plan is flexible and innovative, that it can adapt to changing conditions, and of course, you know how much the community has been informed and involved, and that the plan is informed by the community. So please tell me what else we need to know from you so that we can incorporate into the plan to help you be very proud to recommend it next time through.
Discussion.
I still have a couple other questions, and I don't know if it's for you or Michael, but the plan, I mean, you're not presenting us with a plan, but it seems like the investment decisions seem to be in the 2027, 2030 as two key points to put additional local generation. I guess my question is, why, is there something magic about those years, or was that just a modeling exercise? You had to pick some years.
So the plan does not include build this in this year with this technology, right? That's a portfolio. We use that to help understand, get information to say what goes into the plan, right? The plan is more about policy and which direction to head. And so really that's what we keep talking about is what tools do you have in your toolbox, right? It's the values and the objective statements that guide the next set of decisions. And then how are you going to do that? What's the order at which you're going to prioritize these things? How are you going to emphasize it? And so to answer your question about 2027 and 2030, 2027 was the first in our modeling assumption that we could reasonably build some of those units. And then 2030, we just gave it a certain amount of time to see like what would happen. Let's give them some time to work and see, do we need to? Yeah.
So there's nothing magic about
There's nothing
those
magical about
particular
those years other than there is a lead time to getting solutions in place. That's true for the customer energy solutions as well, the demand side management, right? That will come in over time. And we have risks and issues now that we're trying to resolve.
Okay, and then my second question has to do with the size of the investments. Were you trying to see kind of what's the minimum amount of either peakers or batteries or peakers plus batteries to resolve some of those issues? Is that basically what you were doing?
So what happened was when we were doing the refined portfolios with y'all, we said, what is the minimum amount of peakers and batteries that we can use to resolve the near-term risk? And we knew that we were going to add in, as we talked about, the extra transmission capacity. And we wanted to say, like, what if we need to resolve the risk before that, right? How could we do that?
Okay.
So that's when we tried what was Portfolio 14. Then we said, what if, like, how could we show trade-offs? What if we did a similar amount in quantity of just one of those technologies versus the other, right? And so that's how those came to be, because we had gotten lots of questions from council members about, we want you to compare batteries to peakers, and really, we think we need them both.
Okay, that's helpful. So we could put in all kinds of different numbers, but basically what you're showing, what you believe the answer you've gotten supports the notion that you need both of these technologies.
We need both of those technologies, yes, and it also helps to identify kind of what general quantities we're talking about in terms of the minimum floor to solve near-term risk under normal conditions. Under extreme conditions, if the landscape changes drastically, then we would need some more.
Okay.
And
I have some other questions that are going to be quiet because I think other folks have things
Okay.
to say.
So let's go online. Any questions online?
I have a couple. It's about the it's this peaker batteries question and that chart on slide 24, the reliability risk hours. Yeah, I'm trying to understand what it says because you have on the yellow line you have 110 megawatt batteries, and then in the blue line you have light blue line, right? You have, I don't know, 300 total megawatt in batteries. So I guess I'm trying to figure out what is that because there's mimicking or modeling two different scenarios of battery usage, I guess, 300
Yeah.
megawatts versus 110 megawatts.
Yeah, this is 3 different modeled portfolios showing over time how we installed different generation technologies. And again, the base of these portfolios is shown on the slide before because there is also energy efficiency, demand response, remote wind and solar, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The things that are different about these portfolios are the amount of local utility scale batteries and local natural gas peaker units that are installed. And so these call-out boxes show how much of each technology is installed and when, and then you can see that the line that's being graphed is the resultant reliability risk hour. Reliability risk hour is essentially the time when your portfolio, whether your generation and supply, demand, the situation in Austin is such that we are at risk of local outages, and we likely are having high congestion costs as well. Really, if any one thing were to go wrong at that point in time, we could have outages locally, whereas the rest of the state would still have power. And the things that could go wrong could be demand could continue to increase, and we can't bring more power in, or we have no more to turn on. A generator unit could trip offline or stop producing, and or a transmission could have an outage. And so all of those contingencies increase the risk to reliability. And we see this pretty prevalent today. The numbers of reliability risk are higher than what are deemed acceptable for
But
communities.
these aren't specific portfolios, right? I mean, it just seems, the numbers don't seem to add up with the portfolios, so I just wanted to make
Yeah, it's
make
because
sure
the
that-
numbers on so the yellow one is portfolio 14, and the numbers here plus the numbers on the previous slide add up. So actually, I think it's in the. I think actually we have the portfolios defined. Give me just a second. Can you jump ahead to
Because I
slide
think it shows portfolio
34?
14 has 125 megawatts of storage, and then it shows.
So keep on your screen the reliability risk numbers, and then this is the
Yeah.
total description of the portfolios that you see. 14 has 125 megawatts total of local storage, and that's the yellow line.
I see. There's some going on here.
So there is actually, okay, so I see why the numbers aren't adding up. Let me share. The storage.
I'm looking at, I wasn't really realizing there was an 18 and 19, so I think that's my bad.
Yeah, and the storage here, I didn't want to cover every single box, but there's utility scale storage and then there's substation level storage, which comes in increments of about 5 megawatts a year. And so I didn't put a marker for every single one of those, just because I didn't want to clutter the slide.
Yeah, and I guess I just don't remember seeing 18 and 19 on some of those graphs, so I don't know if we can just make sure that they are on some of those.
So there,
Yeah, like
again,
slide 47, they're not on slide 47, 48, whatever. But anyway, that makes sense. Yeah, I was trying to figure out why the numbers weren't adding up. And I'll just say kind of one last thing. I do think when we jump from like 14 to 16 and there's a big jump in local storage from 125 to or maybe I should say drop from like 700 megawatts local storage to 125, and it seems like we're not quite maximizing what we could do if portfolio 14 selected. So that's so when you say that we're not selecting a portfolio, so we're not setting targets for, let's say, like local storage and sort of peaker units. I guess that's what I'm trying to have. If we're not picking portfolios, then how are we setting targets? Because it seems to me like 125 megawatts local storage may be on the low side, but if we wanted to be higher, again, how does a resource generation plan allow for that?
okay. So when we were talking about maxing out energy efficiency, demand response, rooftop solar, and customer-sided batteries, that's on the demand side of the equation. That's what the DNV study did. And the customer-sided batteries there are incorporated into demand response. The storage we're talking about here is a variable where we can build as much as we think we want to within cost constraints, looking at how it performs from a reliability perspective. And I think one consideration is also land constraints, because there is some space amount. So what we did here was when we built 14, we just tried to say, what's the minimum amount we think we would need to try to reduce the reliability risk hours? And we were kind of guessing, right? At the time, all we had was portfolios 1 through 13 in front of us, and we were just kind of guessing, and we said, well, we think this combination might work. And the results showed that it did a decent job of reducing reliability risk and other risks like liquidity risk. When you take a comparable amount, the rest of the portfolios are really just to kind of assess trade-offs. And so when you take a comparable amount of megawatts and you put it all into storage, what we saw is there is a slight increase in cost, but not a dent in the reliability risk. The only way we ended up seeing numbers that brought the reliability risk down, it's not a one-to-one comparison, but it's what you saw in 16, 17, and 18. Those had much higher volumes of utility scale storage as well as all the demand side management, and that one ended up coming in at a cost that was $1.5 billion more than portfolio 14.
Yeah, no, I understand. Because we could run an infinite number of portfolios, but we don't have the money for that. The other thing that kind of stood out to me in that reliability risk hour analysis with the yellow line, which I think is 14, I'm not sure, is again, if we can do for instance, again, this is the way I'm thinking is how does this potentially translate into a resource generation plan? But if in 2027 we can do 110 megawatts batteries, 100 megawatt peakers, and then in 2030 we can do 100 megawatt peakers, well then why couldn't we do 110 megawatt batteries as well in 2030 if we're saying we could accomplish it in 2027, right? So for me it seems like the 125 is low, and I'm just trying to think of, well, how do we
24 slide.
How can we be as aggressive as we can, right, on that piece, right? If we're not going to get to 500 or 600 or 700, then what do we think we can accomplish on the batteries?
David, can you go to slide 24, please? Yeah, so I just want to reiterate that we're not looking at picking a particular portfolio or specifying a certain amount of technology to build at a particular point in time. We use this to help us guide our direction of what we need to do. So a plan would give us a general direction of where to go. We would take action, go to council for approval to implement things that cost, money outside of what we currently have approval for, which would be any of these things. And then we would implement it, we'd build it. And then we would see how the market has changed, how the energy landscape has changed, and what do we need to do next, right? This simply tells you, like you said, there's an infinite number of possibilities, but we are hoping that we had enough time and analysis to look at a number of different scenarios to be able to draw conclusions about what next step to take. And certainly there would be additional analysis and whatnot. So yes, you could do any combination thereof, but that's not the point of the modeling, to tell you exactly what to build when. It provides the trade-offs, and that's what we're trying to look at here.
But then again, what does the resource generation plan say about batteries, for instance? 'Cause
All right. So go back.
you know what I'm saying? Like, would there be a number? Would there be
Go back
a
to
target,
slide 20.
Yeah.
So often, right, what the resource generation plan says is that all of these tools are important to go into our toolkit to help us achieve our goals and maintain and meet the community values and priorities of reliability, affordability, and environmental sustainability. These tools all have pros and cons, and there are trade-offs associated with each one of them. But when you have a well-supplied toolbox, you are prepared for whatever is coming in the future. So, we could have a plan, for example. I don't suggest we do, but we could have a plan that says, meet your needs with the resources that are the lowest cost possible no matter what, right? If that were the case, then our modeling shows us that utility scale batteries would not be the first thing to be installed, right? But what our plan says, it's worth it. There are benefits with utility scale batteries. Keep those in the mix. Let's make sure that we're investing in that type of technology because it has all of these positives that we want to take advantage of. Highly flexible, can certainly be cleaner, emerging technology that provides a lot of opportunity. So the plan is a nod in the right direction, saying all of our work has said utility scale batteries are a good thing. Add them to your toolkit.
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And I did go back and look at the Excel spreadsheet. It basically shows those reliability hours on slide 24. They start around 35 and they just keep going up and up. If we do nothing, they go up to 40, then 48, then 50 something, then high 50s, then 60. So they
Keep
you don't
going
invest
up.
in anything. They just kind of
Right.
keep going up.
Thus, the investment is needed something needs to be done.
Something's needed.
Something needs to be done. Thank you.
Yeah, do we have I guess we didn't run these without the import capacity increases in 2031.
We did not. We did
Okay.
not, but we did keep the import capacities increase constant, right, for
Yeah.
all of the portfolios where we did include it, so you can see what that, impact is.
Yeah, I'm just trying to look, like, for the light blue one, I'm trying to figure out what's making is it the extra 155 megawatts of batteries that's making it go down so sharp, or is that the import capacity that's making it go down so sharp? Because I'm trying to figure out, is the arrow pointing to what happened after you did it or before you did it?
Yeah, so if you would go to slide 24. So in the year that we installed the batteries, the reliability risk still remained high. In this case, it was at a peak on the blue chart. And then after you installed the import capacity, that collapses.
So the trend line of, so if you'd in 2030, so in 2030, if you'd installed those batteries but didn't do the import capacity, you'd expect that line to continue up?
Yes, or stay relatively
stay-
stable. It depends on what the load growth is, but if memory serves, there was load growth year over year. So yes.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Thank you. All right. Back to 20, please. Any other feedback?
I mentioned this at the working group, but I'll just say again, like, achieving decarbonization, I think, is one goal, but environmental sustainability goes beyond that. So I would like to see that also address air quality.
Okay.
I was actually going to make the same point, that one of the big concerns, and I've mentioned this before, in Austin, we're part of a regional airshed, and the data indicates that between 2020 and 23, the average of the fourth highest ozone level was over the non-attainment threshold established by EPA, meaning, well, I tend to doubt the new EPA will do much, but people's health are being impacted by high ozone levels. Of course, we have different sources of NOx. The electric generating units are not the only source of NOx, but adding to the NOx total from our power plants is a real concern. And so thinking about how we would either limit those emissions so they would go down over time, or make sure at least they don't go up, or we're helping other point sources in the area lower theirs, or some combination, because otherwise we're going to be actually adding to the local pollution problem
Yes.
by building new peakers.
I do. I'm glad you brought that up, because I failed to mention it earlier. But the peaker units that we modeled include SCR, selective catalytic reduction, and we would intend to keep, right, that can reduce the NOx. My understanding is on our current Sandhill peakers, the SCRs reduce NOx between 80 and 95%. And so that certainly would be included. And then, but I know that that's not enough, right, just to know that it's on that. And so local air quality and
But again, the modeling we did, and it's in your appendix, comparing 14, 15, 16, 17, showed that 14 did increase NOx over the period compared to, in other words, adding new peakers did add additional NOx to the area compared to not adding additional peakers.
Noted.
So,
yes.
and
So
it wasn't twice as much, but it was a significant amount.
So local air quality, absolutely, and emissions controls as a whole for all different kinds of emissions, yes.
Okay, any more discussion? Okay. Why don't- go
I
ahead.
had one other question. So that slide says use efficient peakers when needed, and I think that needs some definition, because I don't think we all probably have an agreed definition of need.
And so we were talking about, right, they are essentially the component of the portfolio that is your last resort, but for the less efficient, right, other generation that you would have. So you would say only when nothing else is going to solve the either reliability or congestion risk, we were talking about that earlier, then you would use these units, and you'd use the most efficient ones first.
Well, is need defined in terms of rising prices, the way you've defined your reliability risk hours, or is it defined in terms of, you said those risk hours that, if any one thing goes wrong, then you could be at risk of an outage. Are they there to prevent an outage if something goes wrong? I think one leads to more running of those units than the other.
Yeah, they are there to avoid the reliability and affordability risk to mitigate that we are experiencing now and that we would continue to experience moving forward. So the risk in affordability is related to those congestion costs that we saw. The risk in reliability is related to reliability risk hours. And so fundamentally, they're the last unit that would be dispatched in the ERCOT market. And so that in and of itself means, because we picked peakers as opposed to, for example, a different type of technology, like that could provide a local solution like a combined cycle, right? So by their fundamental nature, they'll only be used when needed. And we will monitor that. We know that through our capacity factor. And if we need to put limits on that, we could do it in a number of ways, as we discussed earlier today.
Yeah, I don't necessarily define all that as a need. I guess I would just hope there's some words in whatever y'all are drafting that explain what you plan to do.
Okay.
The other concept I personally would like to see, so take it as input, is something I said in my survey, which is I think you can establish the DNV study as sort of primary targets or goals or whatever you want to say, and I know you're not trying to create a portfolio, I understand that, and then, but treat them as sort of a starting point and say that you're going to continue to look at ways to have sort of stretch goals. So if DNV tells us, we think there's about 430 megawatts of local solar available over the next 10 years, well, that's what we're assuming, but let's shoot for more, or similarly on energy efficiency or demand response.
I think we understood that. That's in the on slide 18 under flexible targets. So we definitely hear you there, and we'll see how we can fit that in.
Yeah, I guess kind of like I think Raul was getting to, I am supportive of having goals like are in the current plan and have been in all the past plans that are clear, that have years and megawatts and percentages. There's never been any, harsh consequence for missing those, but I do think that they are important for measuring progress along the way. And without them, it doesn't really seem like it's a plan. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't really seem like a plan. And, just since you're asking for feedback, I'll say again here, I don't think that building new gas should be in the toolkit at all.
Okay, noted.
Chair, as we move on to item 5, with respect to item 5, for any statement, action, or vote I offer, I will not take Fayette into consideration in my analysis. Just want to make that statement clear.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're done?
Any other questions or discussion on Lisa's presentation?
So remind us once more, November 27th.
November 27th is, yes, when stuff will be posted with the plan, and then I think you're voting on a recommendation on December 2nd.
Okay.
And we're working feverishly to get you the plan
Okay.
with all the details and your feedback incorporated.
Okay.